Good morning, everyone. Carashsoft would like to welcome you to our Qmulos webinar. Carashsoft Technology is a trusted government IT solutions provider delivering software and support solutions to federal, state, and local agencies. Carashsoft maintains dedicated teams to support sales and marketing for all of its vendors, including Qmulos, Splunk, AWS, Forescout, VMware, and Okta. We are offering CPE credit to those who attend today's webinar. In order to qualify for the credit, you must be actively listening as well as answering any polling questions that will be presented. If you meet all of the requirements, you will receive a certificate. At this time, I would like to introduce our speaker for today, Igor Volovic, VP of Compliance Strategy at Qmulos. Igor, the floor is all yours.
I appreciate everybody joining, and without further ado, let us start. So my name is Igor Volovic. I'm the VP of Compliance Strategy here at Qmulos. We are a compliance automation provider, and we are a big Splunk partner. And of course, this is part of the Splunk conf23 Debrief series. Of course, we were big participants at the conference, and one of the big themes that emerged at the conference was the theme of resilience, that really everybody's trying to pull together and not think about individual functions, operations, but really think about what is it all for. And the big why, of course, is resilience. Now, a lot of folks look at compliance programs as sort of this lagging indicator, purely a bureaucratic function, a historical reporting function, a regulatory obligation that they have to fulfill. But there's also hidden value and hidden power inside the compliance programs, and achieving resilience through compliance is something that we think about heavily, something that we've thought about, something that we've built our entire company around. And our entire partnership with Splunk and with Carashsoft is really about bringing that philosophy to the marketplace. And we've done that over the last dozen years. And so today we'd like to talk about this. We'd like to introduce you to the concept of converged continuous compliance, which is how we think about joining the forces between risk, compliance, security, operations, and providing that value to the enterprise through the power of compliance. So let's talk about some basic challenges that we're seeing across the industry in 2023. And of course, we're past half the year now, and of course, we're looking now into 2024, but these are sort of these running themes that have been around for a long time. Couple of things, right? So on the one hand, we are seeing an increase in new vulnerabilities being discovered. So that's in 2022. So we've seen 65,000 new vulnerabilities. That's an increase of 21% year over year. Records continue to be stolen, right? 33 billion records sounds like a lot. Well, it's getting worse. We're still seeing a global cybersecurity workforce deficit. What is that about? Well, we're not making enough cybersecurity professionals. We're not incentivizing enough folks to come to the marketplace. And well, frankly, we're not paying enough for the good top cybersecurity talent to stay in the jobs and to retain in the positions that they are currently in. So we have a lot of job hopping going on. A lot of folks are moving. You know, upward mobility is great, but at the same time, folks are not staying around long enough to really retain that organizational knowledge, to really become context aware within their organizations. And so there is a lot of that going on. But bottom line is we don't have enough people to do the job. A lot of folks, of course, are feeling understaffed for cybersecurity at the leadership level. 62% are reporting that they don't have enough staff and they really don't know where they're going to get it. So retention is a problem, recruitment is a problem. And an interesting statistic there at the end is that 66% of new cybersecurity spending is projected to be driven by compliance, which is kind of a surprise. When you think about it, folks kind of relegate compliance to this separate function, this very bureaucratic historical reporting function. It tends to be frowned upon or looked down upon by security professionals and security leadership. But it really shouldn't be, because when they actually look at their budget and you see how much of their budget is taken up by compliance activities, it's a significant amount, up to 66%. So why do we continue to treat cybersecurity and compliance differently? Why do we think about compliance as this one separate thing, right? And that's a question we've been asking for a long time, and hopefully on this webinar we'll get to answer that for you. So why is compliance hard? Well, for one, it's complex, right? Compliance is complex. There's a lot of controls. There's a lot of different frameworks. A lot of them are different, right? So you've got management, operational, or technical types of controls. Some of them lend themselves very well to being collected through technical means, meaning that they represent areas of technical evidence that can be collected through automated fashion. Then you have stuff that has to be done manually, right? Regardless of whether you're dealing with technical evidence or manually collected evidence, most compliance programs actually run on manual labor. That is just the reality of it. The entire audit and compliance ecosystem pretty much runs on manual labor. And the fact that we're still talking about that in 2023 is kind of weird, right? It's a little strange. But that is the reality. Most compliance programs are actually done by hand. We're talking about spreadsheets. We're talking about a lot of checkboxes. We're talking about collecting data through what they call data calls. And when we say data calls, we actually mean somebody getting on the phone and begging somebody else for data in the organization. And this happens multiple times per year, sometimes per quarter. And it can be the same data. So frequently it is the same data as being collected over and over again for different compliance frameworks or new compliance mandates, or it might be a new contract requirement that's coming out of a particular area that the company is moving into. For public sector company or public sector entities, rather, you have the same mandates, but also emerging mandates. So you've got things like M2131, you've got M2209, which is the OMB memorandums for centralized logging and respectively zero trust. So things like that continue to come out. We've got Executive Order 14028 that continues to spawn OMB memoranda. So things are always changing. And although compliance tends to have this perception of being a very static type of operation, it's not, right? Things do move all the time. And of course, the other big thing is the frequency of validation. Data calls have to be repeated, controls have to be validated. That has to happen repeatedly. And that's tough to do, right? So manual is kind of the name of the game. It has been historically, and any effort to really automate this has mostly featured workflow automation. And we'll talk about the difference in a minute. So again, continuing with the theme of technical challenges, obviously you've got a lot of things to collect from, different kinds of data, different kinds of events, different kind of logs, and they reside in different kind of places. So how do you normalize? How do you bring that all together? How do you understand what those logs actually mean? How do you derive control state data from those logs? Those are big questions that you have to ask, and you have to answer them. And a lot of these are technical challenges that continue to be difficult for companies to solve. Many control frameworks, we don't need to belabor this point, but here's a quick sample. We don't need to read through it, but kind of take a snapshot of that in your mind. There's a lot, right? And you're probably looking at this and saying, I know at least half of this is applicable to me. And that's not a big surprise, right? So folks are coming under a lot more mandates as time goes on, and with emerging mandates like CMMC 2.0, a lot more folks are finding themselves subject to these requirements. So one big thing is to understand is, as these changes occur, as the different compliance mandates emerge, a lot of the data tends to be the same, right? A lot of that evidence tends to be the same, and the ability to fulfill those requirements can be fairly, it can be within reach, right? But again, it requires automation, it requires synchronization, it requires a lot of synergy. And when a lot of these compliance programs run in parallel to one another, when your HIPAA compliance versus your SOX compliance versus your ISO 27001 compliance, when all of those are separate efforts, it's really hard to find that synergy. So the costs go up and synergy is pretty low. And now it's time for our first audience poll. So the poll question is, what is your biggest challenge in achieving cybersecurity compliance? I'll give you a quick minute to answer. Of course, these answers represent the things that we typically see out there in the field as we talk to customers and prospects, as we do our thought leadership outreach to the industry and talk to leaders in the industry. This is what we hear all the time, right? We don't have enough technical expertise in-house. We have difficulty obtaining necessary documentation and evidence, and there's limited budget for compliance initiatives, despite the fact that it can account for up to 2/3 of your security budget. So I'll give another minute for folks to vote, and then we will continue. So how do we evolve beyond legacy models? That's the big question that we asked all the time, and this is something that Qmulos has been working on for a long time. So let's think about compliance history. how we came to do compliance the way that we do it today. And some it might seem a little silly, some it might seem a little outdated. Well, it's fairly outdated. We've been doing compliance pretty much the same way for about, I don't know, 4,000 years. So if you're wondering what that is the Code of Hammurabi, and it dates back to 1750 BCE. And this was the first that we know so far written compliance code, right? This was actually, this particular portion is the building code. And the building codes, the fire codes that we have today, they emerged from things like the Chicago fire, of last century. And we've done a lot better with compliance management. But originally the idea of what compliance meant, right? It meant attribution and retribution in its basic form. We're trying to find out who did a bad thing. We're trying to punish them and do it in a public way as a way to prevent bad things from happening in the future. So using past acts and public retribution to prevent bad acts from happening again. So that's the model, and we've been following that model as an industry for a very long time. Add to it the aspect of where we actually got our ideas about audit and compliance in the last 50 or 60 years, and it really came from the financial space, right? So the financial audit, those kinds of models, looking at controls, making sure that there is integrity in the controls, and looking again at past acts, finding retribution, places like the SEC, the FTC. Historically, that's what they've done. They look at past acts, they provide public retribution vehicles, and then they try to prevent bad things from occurring in the future. Now, the problem with that model is, well, it doesn't really work all that well for cybersecurity because, well, cyber moves too fast. And by the time that you've actually found some bad act and you've, let's say, achieved some level of public retribution, we've gone, too many things have happened, right? So that lag time that's built into those kinds of compliance models, it's prohibitive. It does not allow us to actually use compliance in a way that actually manages security in real time. And that's something that compliance was originally meant to do, right? It's about managing risk. So when we think about evolving compliance, the idea is that we should stop treating compliance and security as separate functions. We should really converge them and converge them on the dimension of time, right? So we need to bring compliance into real time. So how do we do it? Well, we have to come to the realization that bad things happen in real time. Bad guys don't wait for audits. That don't wait for us to check a checkbox. They don't wait for the compliance report to happen. They're breaking in right now, real time. So there's this great quote from Jan Easterly at CISA. We face threats at machine speed and adversaries unbounded by bureaucracy. What does that mean? Right? Again, it reinforces that point. The bad guys don't wait for check boxes to get checked. They don't wait for audit reports to happen at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year. They're not waiting for that. They're doing this in real time. But our compliance, it looks towards the past. It's retroactive. It's historic. It's a bureaucratic function. And so when we think about how do we achieve compliance that's meaningful, that actually has value to our security operation, where we can actually deliver value to the enterprise, to the compliance program, not just provide this lagging indicator of past performance, well, you have to increase compliance confidence. And you do that through data integrity, meaning we have to ensure that all the data that actually populates our compliance posture, that the understanding of our compliance posture, that it's accurate, that it's timely, that it's actionable, in fact, that it's collected in an efficient manner, that it's effective, right? It's fit for purpose, meaning the data that is informing us about the state of our enterprise actually is actionable, right? That we can look at it, that we can make sense of it, and we can understand it from a perspective of a control and a control posture, not just a piece of technology, not just a vendor solution that's been implemented at some point in time, but actually, what is it doing for me real time now? How is it fulfilling an obligation under a particular control requirement, which fits within a framework or a standard or a mandate? And how does that reduce risk? So in the end, the real objective of cybersecurity compliance is to understand the risk mitigation value of every dollar of investment that you make into your security program. So it's really validating your security strategy and doing it in real time, not retroactively, not through a set of limited pen tests. You're doing it at a macro level. So really, when you think about compliance and compliance automation particularly, you're talking about a macro capability of looking at your entire security apparatus and validating it in real time before you even make those investments. So again, we want to evolve beyond this limited retrospective view. We want to bring compliance into real time, compliance into real time. We want to understand that legacy compliance has really been confined to this mirror risk management model, right? We've been looking into the past, trying to make sense of the future, and frankly, we have barely even brought it into the present. No matter how fast we run those spreadsheets, no matter how much we automate the workflow, no matter how much we enable our ISSOs, the information system security officers, to do their data calls a little faster, maybe a little more efficiently, in the end, it's very manual. These models are built on these manual processes and manual workflows. And there's a lot of paper, whether it's digital or not, right? It's still a lot of paper built into these programs. And so this is something that we think about very heavily, and we think about radically changing this entire model through the power of automation. And so when we think about automation, it's not just about automation because, well, everybody wants automation, right? We're applying it very strategically, and we're applying it across the entire compliance lifecycle. When we think about automation, we call it true automation here at Qmulos. And the idea is to really enable automation where it matters and really drive this notion of automating whatever is automatable. So anything that can be automated should be. That's kind of the mantra that's driven us since the beginning, since 12 years ago when we founded the company. And the idea is, if it can be automated, it can give you strategic value. If it can streamline the data collection, it can streamline analysis, validation, reporting, monitoring, all of these functions that you see in front of you here. The more automation you apply, both on the data side and the workflow side, the more maturity you attain, but also the more confidence, the more integrity your program attains, because you're relying less and less on manual labor and manual effort, which is, as we know, error prone. So more automation means more confidence, it means more integrity, and it means more timeliness. So you're getting to that understanding of where your environment stands at any given time in real time. You're shortening that cycle. And so now is a good time for our audience poll number 2. And the question is, how confident are you in your organization's ability to maintain compliance with relevant standards and frameworks? So the choices are: I'm very confident, somewhat confident, not very confident, or not at all confident. And these all map pretty well across the industry. And when we talk to folks, that's what we hear back. So would love to hear from you. So of course, this is all confidential. Feel free to answer, and I'll give you a minute to do that. Looks like we've got some results coming in, and we'll go ahead and continue. So what do we mean by true compliance automation? Well, there's the concept of converged continuous compliance. There is continuous control monitoring, and there's continuous compliance automation. These concepts do tend to overlap and intersect, and some of these are terms of arts that are present in the industry, and some of these are things that we've come up with, like converged continuous compliance. And this is something that's truly Qmulos. That's what we created as an idea to capture what it is that we deliver to the market and to our clients. And let's dig into these concepts a little bit. So I think it's important to understand different types of compliance automation. There's a lot of it in the industry. There's a lot of vendors who talk about compliance automation, and they're in the marketplace right now. When we asked, when someone asks us, who are our Qmulos competitors, we always chuckle because, nobody's really doing it the way we are. And I know it's probably something you hear from a lot of vendors, but when you understand what true compliance automation actually means, it becomes a lot more clear. So when you think about management controls, operational controls, technical controls, and what kind of automation is possible, things become a little more clear. So for instance, with management controls, you've got your periodic assessments, you've got snapshot in time, right? So you're capturing that snapshot at a particular time in the organization's lifecycle. They tend to be fairly static, right? You're looking at them for that one period of time, you're taking that snapshot, you really don't know what's going on from period to period, right? So as your cadence, your compliance audit cadence, or your assessment cadence happens, that's about the only time you get to touch those controls, you get to see those controls. And when we say touch, really, you're asking somebody who operates those controls to tell you what their state is. And, a lot of the stuff tends to be very subjective and opinion driven, what I call opinion farming at scale, right? Most compliance programs, most assessment and audit programs tend to be just that. They're opinion farming at scale. So very subjective. So you really don't know, right? You're depending on the control owner to tell you what the state is. You are depending on the analyst to analyze the response that they get. And then at some point, somebody else is going to coalesce all of that together, collate that into a report, and that's going to wind up in front of somebody, outside or inside of your organization. There's layers of that subjectivity, right? So operational controls, very similar situation there, right? Again, periodic assessments, snapshot in time, static, and then also very subjective and opinion driven. So that leaves us with technical controls. Well, technical controls are kind of magical that way, right? So you have continuous control monitoring, right? You can always watch them. They can always ping in. You're collecting data real time. So today, this day and age, you don't have to wait for data to come in, right? You don't have to ship it. You don't have to pull it. You don't have to do these periodic polls. You can actually collect data real time. So as we speak, we could be collecting data from every technically enabled control out there. And some controls could actually be instrumented. Even though they're not naturally enabled for technical monitoring, you can instrument them kind of by proxy. You can create instrumentation around them to still understand what is happening with that particular control. That's actually very common in edge computing and OT type networks, so in industrial IoT and Internet of Things, where you see industrial controls being actually monitored by proxy, right? They may not have the ability to retrofit a control directly into them, right? So you have to monitor externally. Still, as long as you're collecting, you're getting that knowledge about that control state. You've got real-time posture assessment. You always know what's going on, right? So you can cast that wide net of visibility across the entire environment and understand what is happening in real time, which is the most important thing. If you can get to real time, that is the objective. It's dynamic, right? It's always happening. You move as the environment moves, so you can kind of keep up with what's happening. You can determine what kind of mitigation needs to happen. As risks emerge, you get to understand them in real time, right? You don't have to wait for that monthly, quarterly, annual assessment to then do your risk management decisions and then apply the mitigation, right? A lot of that takes time. Again, we're talking about that compliance latency or compliance lag. This is something that you solve for. And again, it's objective and evidence-based. So again, you're solving for the biggest problem with most compliance programs, which is you're getting rid of this opinion farming at scale. You get to objectivity, you get to evidence, you get to the truth, and you get there now. So this is the basic entry into what compliance automation means and how it's different, right? So we're not talking about workflow automation. We're talking about automating the entire compliance lifecycle end to end and making it about evidence, making it about integrity, making it about the truth and getting to it in real time. So most legacy GRC, of course, kind of focuses on the management controls and operational controls. We focus across this entire spectrum with a particular focus in technical controls, enabling those full lifecycle automation, true automation, as we call it. And then, of course, giving you the same pane of glass for all the other controls that you have to monitor, right? You may not be able to get to them in a technical fashion, but that's okay, right? That's just the way they're built. But we can still capture them and we can still present them in the same reporting interface. So we talk about, again, true compliance automation. Very quickly, we'll talk about, again, automation for us is not just because we happen to be an automation company. We built the company to do compliance automation and to deliver that trust and to reduce the compliance lag, compliance latency through the power of converged continuous compliance. That's what automation means to us: increasing trust, reducing time. And so when we think about, again, kind of revisiting this concept, the purpose is to give you end-to-end automation through trusted data sources, streamline all the workflows, give you complete control visibility, make sure that you're relying on technical evidence elements because that is where the truth is, and then drive risk-driven decisions, right? We want this to be about risk. In the end, compliance is meant to be about managing risk across your entire enterprise. And it's tough to do when you're relying on nothing but opinions that are also delayed by months and sometimes years. It's not uncommon for us, in kind of a small anecdote from the field, right? We talk to a lot of folks, especially on the public sector side, where it's not uncommon for them to have data going back 3, 4, 5 years. By law, they have to have their ATOs, they run on 3-year cycles. It's not uncommon to find data even older than that, right? So how can you make any valuable risk management decisions? Can you truly manage risk for an organization when your data is that stale, right? And the answer is you really can't. That's where compliance automation comes in. That's where relying on technical evidence and real-time collection, real-time automation, that's where it matters. And so again, converged continuous compliance, the vision, again, bringing compliance, risk management, assurance, security operations, and the enterprise mission all together, right? Where the context is the mission, where you're not looking at compliance as a separate function, where it is an integral element of your entire security operations, risk operations. It's really about operationalizing compliance, right? And this is not, again, a concept that exists out there. This is something that we're promoting and evangelizing, getting people to understand that compliance, actually operationalizing compliance or creating compliance operations within your environment, it is possible. And you don't have to do it by throwing more people at the problem. It actually can be automated, and we're showing you how we do that. So again, synergy through convergence. Removing the silos, right? There's a lot of silos built into security. There's a lot of different sub-functions. Folks tend to wrap around specific technologies. And, it's not uncommon to have a team that's dedicated and actually named after a particular type of technology, intrusion detection, endpoint detection and response, incident response, different functions, different skill sets, different technologies that they support and manage. And all of those are important, and skill sets, they need to be sometimes very deep and narrow. But overall, again, this is about managing risk and having that holistic understanding of where the risk comes from, how it emerges, how it needs to be managed. That's really what it's about. So bringing it all together through the power of big data analytics and ensuring that the entire community that is there to manage risk, not just cyber risk, but overall risk for the enterprise, that is the objective that we're trying to achieve. And that's what convergence is about. And again, this is a theme that's emerging more and more. And we just presented at the Gartner Security Conference in DC a couple of months back. Convergence was another big theme. So we're looking at resilience and convergence between the Splunk conference, the Gartner conference, the Forrester conference. A lot of the analysts are talking about the same thing, and that this is the emerging trend. And this is a trend that we really are trying to promote, right? Convergence and resilience are really the two pillars where a lot of programs can benefit from. We talked about the lack of reliable talent to bring into the cybersecurity industry. 3.4 million jobs, that's the deficit that we have right now. Well, guess what? When we look at security programs, what we find out is because of the reliance or over-reliance, continued over-reliance on manual labor, and the lack of true automation in these workflows and these data collection models, you're really not using the labor that you have in the most efficient manner. And so some of the analyses that we've done in the past, you look at a team of 50 ISSOs, that's 100,000 annual labor hours. When we actually look at what they're busy with, they're basically acting like human fax machines a lot of times. And I know that can be a little derisive, but that is the unfortunate reality. And that's something we also want to fix, we want to solve for. You have smart folks, you have skill sets, you have capabilities that you're just not unleashing onto your environment. And you could be, by applying a little bit of automation, taking a leap forward in automating not just your workflow, but also your data collection methods, and ensuring that you've got that end-to-end life cycle understanding of your compliance program, and really getting to this idea of compliance operations through the power of convergence and continuous compliance. So the question that we ask is, how much actual risk management are your people doing? Well, sometimes it's barely 25%, right? The rest of the time is just paperwork. So that's something you want to solve for. That's something you want to understand. And guess what? You already have those people in those seats, right? It's just about unleashing their power and getting more out of them by making them smarter, enabling them, empowering them, and then getting them to actually manage risk. What a concept, right? And this is our final poll, number 3. So the question is, what area of your cybersecurity compliance program could benefit most from automation and streamlined technical evidence collection? So the areas are access control, incident response, audit and accountability, or configuration management. And I'll give you a minute to answer that. All right, we got some answers coming in, so we'll continue. And so wrapping up, why would you want to embrace converged continuous compliance? Well, as we talked about, hackers don't care about checkboxes and policies. They care about infrastructure and data. So they're in your environment right now, real time. Why isn't your compliance program operating in real time? Good question to ask. You're busy chasing users with awareness training exercises and system owners with control data requests, those data calls that we talked about, right? Well, the bad guys are exploiting your deficient controls, right? Because The time that passes, again, that compliance lag, this compliance latency that's built into most compliance programs, the time that passes between the identification of a failed control or deficient control and the time that it's exploited, that can be, days, weeks, months. The dwell times are getting shorter for intrusions, but nonetheless, for compliance, dwell times, it runs into months and years, right? So the time that passes between you figuring out that a control has failed and somebody else who's already figured out and is exploiting it right now, that can be that exact window of opportunity for the bad guys to operate in. So shrinking that, eliminating that window of opportunity, again, is the objective. Administrating controls express your enterprise's intended state. This is how things ought to be, exactly. And so technical controls actually tell the true story, right? So if you want to know what's going on, you want to rely on technical controls. You want to eliminate your reliance on subjective opinion farming at scale. And so as a CISO, do you want opinion? Do you want fact? Do you want fact or do you want fiction? And some CISOs don't, right? They cannot handle the truth because, well, frankly, they've never been told the truth. Converged continuous compliance is the method of getting there, or figuring out what the ground truth is and knowing it in real time on a continuous basis. So a quick brief overview of how Qmulos compares to legacy GRC programs. You can take a look at that on your own time. I don't have to read through it, but bottom line is, again, a lot of the value that we talked about, we've built our entire platform and we've built our entire company around the idea of not being your legacy GRC provider, on really changing the game for compliance automation, compliance operations, and really inventing the idea of converged continuous compliance to deliver that value through the compliance program for the first time ever, possibly. Quick overview of the company. We've been around for, like I said, over a dozen years now. Veteran-led, 95% cleared. We're really big in the intelligence community, in the public sector, DoD, federal, civilian, and also on the commercial side. So we can provide services across the gamut of different requirements, different environments. We are two big products are Q Compliance and Q Audit. One is, of course, a compliance platform. The other one is mostly built for insider threat management within the intelligence community, for intelligence community standard 527. So if your environment needs that, we have that. And we are big partners with Splunk. So Splunk is our data layer. So if you've got Splunk, it's a very easy leap forward to take advantage of the data you already have through the power of converged continuous compliance driven by Qmulos. And with that, I thank you for your time. Thanks for joining us today on this webinar. And if you have any questions, please contact us, and the QR code right there, please scan it, or just go to Qmulos.com or contact us at sales@Qmulos.com. And thank you for your time.
I'd like to thank our participants as well as Igor for being with us today. We hope the information you received during this webinar has been helpful to you and your organization.